All right, everybody, welcome to our October 2022 Lunch and Learn. Our topic is on domestic violence. And I'm so excited to be joined by Jennifer Naccarelli and Angie Hattery from the University of Delaware. So ladies, actually, can you kind of get started, kind of introduce yourselves to us a little bit and tell us a little bit about what you do on a daily basis?
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Okay, hello, I'm Jennifer Naccarelli. I am the Associate Chair and an Associate Professor in the Department of Women and Gender Studies. So that's one of the hats I wear. Been there for about 15 years teaching. I helped establish our domestic violence prevention and services program. And with Angie, we are building our Center for the Study and Prevention of Gender-Based Violence. So Angie and I are co-directors of our new research center. But it's not really research. I don't know why I said that. It's both research and training. And the foundation of everything we do is we want to hear from advocates in the field, practitioners in the field, learn from them, and integrate that into the scholarship that we produce and into the training that we produce for our undergraduates. We are the only program in the whole country that provides a professional path to undergraduates to become certified DV specialists upon graduation. So our dream is that, you don't have to go to grad school, that you can work as an advocate or a prevention specialist in the field right after graduation. So that's sort of what I do on a daily basis. Angie?
Yeah, so I'm Angie Hattery, and as Jennifer mentioned, co-director with her of the center, and also I'm a faculty member in the Department of Women and Gender Studies. I have only been at UD, this is my third year, and to put that into perspective, the entire first year was on Zoom. And so I never set one foot on campus till I'd already worked on the campus for a year, which is very weird. And I'm still meeting people for the first time in person who I've worked with for several years. So I'm new to Delaware, new to the University of Delaware, doing my best to learn the community. And the only thing I would add to what Jennifer already said is that one of the things we think about often and hope for the center as we build it is that it joins the sort of is a place where best practices can be, uncovered through research and then applied in practice. So, the things that we're going to talk about today are rooted in evidence-based research to produce best practices. And that's, it might sound like, well, sure, that's what everybody does, but if you've taken all kinds of some kinds of training, you might ask yourself the question whether there was any evidence connected to it or not. And so one of the things that we strive always to do is to, center the voices of the people who are impacted and connect it to the larger research that either we're conducting or is being conducted in the field.
Awesome.
So I think that gets us started. We wanted to just hear who's in the room. So just have each of you introduce yourself real quickly.
Sure. How about I call on people? So Ginny,
Okay.
I'll start with you. Ginny, if you can tell us a little bit about you.
Oh, goodness. I'm Ginny Terzak. I've been a CASA for, 7 or 8 years now. And I just moved to Sussex County from Kent County. So trying to figure a little bit of that out. And I've been with my last case for almost 4 years. And he's a teenage young man.
Awesome. Thank you, Ginny. Jess Hazard, how about you?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jess Hazard. I am a CASA coordinator for Kent and Sussex mostly.
Awesome. Thank you. Susan Fowler-Lesham, tell us about you.
I've been a CASA for just a little over a year. And my first case is heading towards adoption at this time.
Thanks, Susan. Darcy, can you tell us about you?
Hi, my name is Darcy. I've been a CASA for about 1.5 years. I have a sibling combo. And then my day job is I work in education.
Thanks, Darcy. Tricia, tell us about you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Trisha Ewing. I've been a CASA for also about a year and a half. Have my second case, another infant. And my day job is I work for Prevent Child Abuse Delaware. So all these things intersect.
Thank you. Jose, can you tell us about you?
Yeah, I'm a CASA in Kent now for a year. Before that, I was a CASA in Georgia for almost 4 years. I was a retired CPS worker. I was a treatment worker. I have currently 3 cases, closed 2 out, and I kept 1 and I have 2 new ones. Jess is my boss and she's very strict.
I love it. Helene, can you tell us about you? Helene, can you unmute yourself? Sorry.
Sorry about that. My name is Helene McKinney, and I'm a CASA under Camille Kashishian, and I've been a CASA for approximately 8 years. And I presently have a case with 2 teenagers. One just got placed with the biological father, and the other one is still in a group home at Murphy School. We're hoping that the young man is going to be placed shortly because the case is coming to an end for, it's been almost a year.
Awesome. Thanks, Helene. Jen Falkowski. Jen, tell us about you.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jen Falkowski. I am a statewide CASA coordinator, and I have been working in child welfare since 1995.
Since you were like 10.
Since I was like born, yeah. So I'm super old. I started out actually as a PBH. It was called child mental health back then, but a PBH worker. And then I was actually an investigation worker with DFS. And I'm the second longest employee for the Office of the Child Advocate. So obviously I like this place. I like these ladies. Jess, you should be much nicer to your CASAs. But it's a great place and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Joyce, can you tell us about you?
Hi, my name is Joyce Rawlings. I also am new to Delaware, I guess 2 years, and I've been a CASA for 2 years. And I've had 2 cases. One is going towards adoption, and the other case is I got in, I think it's May or June, and that's interesting, but it's with under 5-year-olds. And both of them involve some domestic violence.
Thank you. Carmine, can you tell us about you?
My name is Carmine Alessandro. I am just past my 2nd year as a CASA. I've had 2 cases, both mid-teenagers, and I'm a financial services professional by trade and a graduate of the University of Delaware.
Awesome. Go Blue Hens. Shelly, can you tell us about you?
Hi there, I'm Shelly Smith. I've been a CASA for 5 years, and I've started working with teenagers who I've worked with the whole time, and 3 of them have transitioned to extended jurisdiction. So
awesome. Thanks, Shelly. Lisa, can you tell us about you? Can you unmute yourself and tell us about you?
Sorry about that. Lisa Hollingsworth, I'm trying to remember how long I've been a CASA, but it's probably at least 8 years. So I've had several kids and several families, and the one in particular that I've followed her entire life because she aged out when she was in the system, and she's now 26 and has a daughter of her own and a fabulous mom, and it's all good. So I'm also a mental health therapist for children and families by trade. So
thank you, Lisa. Sophie, can you tell us about you, Soph?
Hi, I've been a CASA for about a year and a half now. I have 2 cases currently, both teenagers. Well, one is on extended jurisdiction, 18, but yeah, so I am interested in learning. My kids have been very challenging cases. So
awesome. Thank you so much. Robin, if you can hear me, can you tell us about you?
I can, and my apologies for being off video. I'm having technical issues with my camera.
All good.
I am Robin Schilling. I'm from Pennsylvania, but live in Delaware part-time. I became a CASA in Pennsylvania in 2020 and have an active case that I'm working here. I only completed my CASA training in Delaware this spring, and I do not yet have a case because I just had to ask for respite care in the expectancy of my first grandchild. So I'm on respite till probably the beginning of 2023.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for joining us anyway. And Nick, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, long time no see, Jennifer. We were just at the proclamation together yesterday. So my day job, I'm a policy coordinator for the Delaware Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So I'm really excited to see the UD perspective. And I actually have a case now that has a lot of extensive domestic violence, and that's the major reason I'm advocating for dad not to regain custody. So very excited to hear your training.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. I think that was everybody. I don't think I missed anybody.
No, I think you're good. I think Jennifer's going to kick us off.
Great. So for some of you in the room, this will be familiar, but we thought it was a good place to begin with a very brief discussion of a tool that's used in the field of domestic violence, in the field of healthy relationships, called the power and control wheel. And I'm sure most of you in the room are familiar with this. So we're not going to spend too much time, but we just wanted to highlight the way that tiny incidents of violence combine and escalate, and highlight the ways that many of these acts are not even illegal. So it's really important to consider in the framework of our conversation today of why somebody might remain in an abusive relationship. Many times they don't even realize how severe and in how much danger they are until it has reached that pivotal point of combination and escalation. So by really briefly discussing what this might look like, how violence might manifest in a parent's life, we'll see the combination, and then we'll move on to those really critical factors about why you don't just leave, why you don't just pack up your kids and remove them from this really difficult situation. And the Delaware Coalition Against Domestic Violence has done some interesting work about economic justice in Delaware, and we're going to pull on a little bit of their work in the state as we discuss the financial reasons why people might stay. So that's a little bit of an overview. Right now, I'm going to briefly share one screen, and then we'll go back to seeing one another's faces for the duration of our conversation. Okay, so folks in the field know this well, and it's the power and control wheel. So I want to just talk through the wheel. We're going to just go clockwise, and I want you to think about while you're listening about the convergence of tiny little things. And I want you to think about where you see an actual illegal act versus an act that could not be prosecuted or a survivor victim couldn't take legal action against. So let's just think about intimidation in an abused partner's life. So this is really how you see those subtleties come out. Making someone afraid by using a look, an action, a gesture, a signal. Lots of property damage goes on in the display of intimidation, destroying things that are really important to a person's independence, for their autonomy, that might serve as an escape route. Things like cars, things like phones, threatening to break a phone, actually breaking the phone. In the use of intimidation, we see a lot of the power of animals and pets in people's life. So a threat against a pet or displaying violence against a pet all falls under the intimidation. then we see what we normally define as a form of domestic violence, and that is psychological and emotional abuse. So we see this through put downs, we see this making you feel bad about yourself, shaming a victim in front of children, in front of friends, family members, professionally, convincing them that they can't do anything right, that they couldn't function as an independent person. Also, playing mind games, you know, making you think you're exaggerating the abusive nature of the relationship when it's not. So we've got a little intimidation, and then it combines with emotional abuse, and we're in an increasingly dangerous situation. Common, one of, we say, why don't folks leave? Well, if they're isolated, it's going to be very difficult to leave. During the phase of isolation, we see extreme control over freedom of movement, freedom of self-expression. It goes down to controlling what somebody might wear, controlling who you speak with, isolating you from your friends and family, limiting contact through hyper surveillance, surveillance of text messages, surveillance of tracking mechanisms on cars, surveillance of keypads when you come in and out of your garage and get that signal. These isolation techniques, again, aren't obviously illegal in and of themselves, but are combining to make the person feel as if they cannot leave, or that they have very limited opportunity to get out of an abusive situation. Then in minimizing, denying, blaming, things are starting to heat up. And when a victim might start trying to limit the isolation, limit the emotional abuse, limit the intimidation, this is where we see gaslighting come in. This is where we see a denial of the past behaviors or a denial of their significance. Here, a victim starts to wonder, doubt their own self-analysis of a situation. And an individual needs to have confidence in themselves to be able to leave an abusive situation. So the minimizing, denying, and blaming also really factors strongly in why someone will not leave, because they feel as if they lack the ability to do so successfully and safely. Obviously, utilizing children is going to be one of the sole factors why somebody does not leave an abusive relationship. So this begins early on with making you question your ability and skill as a parent, making you feel guilt for actions you take as a parent, using the children to convey threatening messages to you, using visitation. I bet many of your clients might be in visitation to send messages to other parents. And then of course, threatening to injure, hurt, take children away, displaying violence in front of the children. These are all ways that children are utilized to coerce a victim to remaining in a dangerous situation. Quite obviously, gender roles play a tremendous role in the perpetuation of intimate partner violence. So treating somebody like a servant, believing that you're entitled to deference, control, being the person who defines the terms of the relationship, all of the rules, all of the decisions about socialization, and of course, all of the financial decisions. So with utilizing children and utilizing economic abuse, and combined with the isolation and blame, it becomes really difficult for a person to engage in help seeking behaviors. So the economic abuse really is widespread. And we're going to spend a little bit of our time together discussing this as a group. But really briefly, preventing an individual from earning their own income, making somebody ask for all forms of financial support through an allowance, control of all credit cards, control of your credit history, control of the loan, the title, everything So an individual is completely isolated from any ideas about how to acquire income. Job sabotage, we see a lot here, keeping a victim up late, engaged in a fight so that they perform poorly on the job and face consequences on the job. This is a lot of the ways we see economic abuse manifesting. And then the coercion and overt threats. This is what we usually think of when somebody is embedded in a violent relationship, carrying out threats, hurting one another, violence, injury. But we also can't forget about the role of sexual coercion here, and forced reproduction, tampering with birth control, keeping somebody vulnerable and connected through the use of children. Also, we can't forget about making a victim engage in illegal behaviors and then threatening to expose them. This is another form of coercion and threats. So we just wanted to real briefly begin here so you can see the tiny little things and the big little things, and we can begin to understand why it might not be so easy to just pack up and go.
Do we want to pause for any particular like thoughts right at this moment, questions, clarification?
I just want to add, maybe because I didn't see this and I'm in your wheel, but how drug abuse or drug interaction is involved in all of this as well.
I mean, I would say, and I'm not sure exactly what you have in mind, but many ways. Certainly, drugs can be used to keep somebody, well, in lots of ways, to keep somebody beholden to you. Drugs, you know, you get someone addicted and then they need whatever it is you're controlling. Drugs can be used to, you know, tamper with people's memory or their, so if you're imagining what Jennifer was talking about with the gaslighting, and I hate and love simultaneously the fact that gaslighting since 2016 has become a term that most of us are pretty familiar with because we see it a lot now, and we didn't used to have such obvious examples. But if you're gaslighting and you're addicting someone or encouraging one or forcing someone to use substances, it becomes really difficult to tell what's actually happening, what's reality, what's not reality. Is that the kind of thing you were thinking about, or?
Yeah, but also in terms of both parents being having substance abuse and that leading to some of the DV in the home. Also, I'm old school. I'm not sure I understand gaslighting because I mean, people using the term, but I'm not sure. So.
Oh no, gaslighting, great. Gaslighting. A lot of people who are who have been abused, I hear them use phrases like it's crazy making. So we have an argument and I push you down the stairs and you say to me, I can't believe you pushed me down the stairs. Or the next morning I get up and I have a black eye and say, I can't believe you pushed me down the stairs. And you say, I didn't push you down the stairs. You fell down the stairs. Or I didn't put a tracking device on your phone, or I didn't stalk you. You did that to me. I was just responding to you. It's absolutely turning around. And it might seem for people who aren't in an abusive relationship, well, come on, like I know what's true and what's not true. But I think to Jennifer's point, when you have multiple things happening at the same time, people have a really difficult time telling what's the truth.
Also, Joyce, thinking about the use of drugs and alcohol, and so many folks in the room are working with adolescents, have had, you know, this is a big problem in teen dating violence, the use of drugs and alcohol, because for them it's illegal. So it's used to control and coerce behavior. The purchasing, the sale, the use of drugs then becomes a threat to keep someone embedded in an abusive relationship. And then also we see a tremendous use of drugs and alcohol for sexual coercion And then for things like videotaping and public shaming after a moment. So we see this as a really important factor of abuse in unhealthy relationships in teens.
Okay. The other thing is in terms of the internet, exposing them, using pictures and stuff like that, in terms of we took pictures and I want to expose you or whatever. And that's almost like threats, you know?
These are all, that's a great example of why somebody wouldn't leave. If there was a threat of being exposed for something that you willingly chose to do or you were coerced to do.
And the internet, it can also be sort of a double-edged sword. It sometimes the control is preventing people from being on the internet because so that they don't have any connections. So not letting you be on Facebook, for example, because that's the only outlet. And certainly we saw an increase in that sort of thing in the last 2.5 years with COVID, that sometimes people's only connection to the outside world was the internet. And if I prevent you from, or I hack into your account and I thought I was talking to my friend Jennifer privately, and now you've hacked in and you can see that I'm actually asking Jennifer for help, or she's asking me if I'm okay. This can become the trigger for, significantly escalated violence, just as one example.
We're seeing more and more disclosure of passwords, usernames and passwords, as evidence of your commitment to your relationship, as evidence of your commitment to your love. And then that's very quickly utilized to monitor and then control and isolate. So, that's one of the things we teach with healthy relationships. Whenever you can, do not share those passwords. Change them frequently.
Jennifer and I didn't put this on our outline, but as you were doing the power and control wheel, and we're having our conversation about, ending with coercion, a colleague and I, just a week ago, released some research where we argue that there's coercive tactics and then there's coercive violence. And I think that you might see some of the coercive violence show up in some of the cases that you have. So coercion, as Jennifer, very clearly articulated, it often involves, or we make the distinction that it involves coercing someone to do something. We argue that there's this other form of coercive violence that isn't using coercion as a tactic, but it's actually exposing you to an institution or a system that will be harmful. And Jennifer gave a couple of examples, reporting you to CPS, right, or DCFS, because so then I don't have to, engage in any of these forms of violence in the power and control wheel. I've falsely accused you of something that now a whole system is going to come down on you, right? Or you talked about drugs and alcohol, cases where people their partner is system impacted and they're facing additional jail time, parole violation because they've got some drugs on them. You take the drugs and now you're exposed to the criminal legal system. Or I think a lot about, we heard yesterday, we were at an event, marking Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I was struck by someone in law enforcement who talked about a coercive violence. And this was multiple filings to get the victim to have to show up in court as a way of intimidating and engaging in the other forms of power and control. That's not limited to, that can be custody. In this case, it was a filing. He couldn't get her to come to court, so he filed a $15 Verizon bill in some sort of little property court to get her to come to court. And the reason that one sticks for me in this conversation is not knowing any of that. Anyone might look at, well, she has a lot of charges against her. She's been called to court a lot. She's been referred to DCFS or Child Protective Services a lot. And maybe it's all true. and maybe it's not. And I think that's part of what we wanted to, articulate and talk about a little bit today is abusers are incredibly manipulative, and they will use any tool that they can find in the toolkit to manipulate not only the person they're being abusive to, but to manipulate the kids, to manipulate each of you sitting in the room, to manipulate me, to manipulate police officers, court officers. And that's where sort of we hope that understanding a little bit more about some of these techniques is helpful as you think about your work.
Could I make a comment on that?
Please, yeah.
If a CPS report or the hotline report is made and you are an investigator, it's extremely hard to interview or to have a meeting with the victim herself without the partner, because a lot of times they make sure they are there.
Yep.
And you have to do a lot of manipulation yourself to meet with the victim alone.
Yep.
Angie, I just wanted to add, when you were talking about that, that really struck me because, and this is something that our office here was involved in, but a very infamous, I should say, case in Delaware, I'm sure you've all heard of or remember reading about, or we're somehow close to the shooting at our courthouse here in Newcastle County. And that's a perfect example. He abducted the children, didn't return them from a visit, was found, in another country. And then the kids came back, and then the multiple filings, he dragged her into court whenever he could. They were cyber stalking her, but you're absolutely right. He was just frivolous. He had her in court every chance he could, and she knew she was in danger. So she brought a support person with her. And then, there he was. And that's why our whole court building is now a lot different than it used to be. But a really good example, a powerful example of what you were saying.
I appreciate you sharing that story. That came up yesterday as well. I mean, I think, abuse runs a whole gamut from not as serious to super serious. But at the super serious end, I mean, they will use anything. They will kill their own children. They will threaten to kill the children. They'll do, it's a sort of, if I can't have you the way I want you, no one else is going to. And, that's where these things can go.
And even before that incident, when we think about that case, the financial cost to the victim during the multiple filings, that every day represents transportation, childcare, time away from work, the combined consequences and the devastation that follows those multiple filings. It's a tremendous economic expense,
and may tip the economic balance in such a way that she can't leave safely because she's so busy working to pay for all this other stuff
and must return.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we transition into some of that discussion? Because it's
I think we should. Do we want to start with how dangerous it is to leave in the very beginning, or should we hop somewhere else?
Let's at least mention how dangerous it is to leave, and we can come back to it. But I think it's important to emphasize that my experience with some of these cases is the victim of the abuse is being asked to be responsible for the abusive behavior that someone else is perpetrating. And the question that we find is asked all the time, but especially if, cases that end up with you all working on them. Well, if she was a good mom, if she cared about the kids, why didn't she just leave? And so I think we have to really just put that in the center of the conversation and interrogate it a little bit. And where I like to start when I think about that question, well, let me preface by saying this: a research project that I'm currently doing, but also one I did a number of years ago, we interviewed both parties, both sides of the couple. And I tried to ask a different question, which is, why doesn't he leave? So people always ask, why doesn't she leave? But if he, why doesn't he leave, right? Why is it that the onus is always on the victim of the abuse to be the person that leaves, as opposed to asking the abuser to leave. So I think it's instructive to ask the question the other way. But part of what's underneath that question for me is it built on an assumption that leaving will keep her safe. It's built on an assumption that leaving will keep her safe. And in fact, and this is where, you know, we like to talk about the stats and the best practices, leaving doesn't ensure safety under any stretch of the imagination. And here's a couple of stats. A woman is 500 times more at risk when she leaves for violence. So the risk to her is magnified exponentially, right? Exponentially. She's 70 times more likely to be murdered after she leaves, and she stays at elevated risk for 18 months. So leaving presumes that the violence stops and that she's not at actually greater risk. So when we think about the safety of the children, you know, I think sometimes it's easy to think that the safest thing she can do for the children is leave. But in fact, to keep the children safe, sometimes that's actually not the safest thing to do, right? Sometimes staying and doing everything she can to try to limit the violence or limit its impact on the children can have a safer outcome. And the case from, it's 2013, right, was the shooting in the courthouse, is a great example of that, right? So I think it's always important to remind ourselves that leaving doesn't necessarily ensure that someone's going to be safe.
But besides being, of course, more at risk for harm on herself and the children or getting killed, most women, they are so numb, they are so worn, they don't have the self-esteem anymore, they don't think they can do it. They need the help to get out.
Yep.
I agree with Marie, because I was just thinking, even when you say why don't they leave, but it's even just coming up with the decision to try to leave and what all that involves, the thinking process, I mean, just that, taking that upon, that could be very overwhelming to somebody that doesn't have, like you said, the confidence or doesn't have assistance or doesn't have the resources. It can be so overwhelming that you just kind of give up and kind of take the abuse and just stay.
Or you've been told that you're, you know, the part of the emotional abuse is you've been told that you're dumb, that you're stupid, that you don't know how to handle money, that no one else would ever want you. You can never make it on your own. And over, you know, a period of time of hearing that, and this is, you know, to Jennifer's point, you've heard that, so your self-esteem is low. You don't have access to financial means because that's all been taken away. You've been isolated from your community or your job, and so you don't have friends.
And while you're in isolation, while you're being monitored, you know, those supports that might help someone leave are out of reach for many. So the state of Delaware, through People's Place, through Child Inc., through the YWCA, has a number of programs to help safety plan with an individual who wants to leave the relationship, and a ton of resources from financial compensation to PFA, free legal representation, to housing. But if you don't have access to the advocate, access to free legal care is insurmountable. Access to safe housing is insurmountable. We have to get the advocates to the people and the people to the advocates in a way that's safe for everybody. But sometimes that's truly impossible.
But I've also have heard the victims say, when I was in an abusive relationship, at least it was predictable.
Yep.
I knew what happened.
Yep.
And that in combination with not having the financial means, completely cut off from friends and family, very low self-esteem, being put down. I mean, at least they know what they could expect if whatever they did would have a certain reaction.
Absolutely. It's implying that, especially for women, that the outside world is safer. And we know that it isn't necessarily, right? It isn't necessarily safer. And I have interviewed many women who say exactly that. Like, at least I know what to expect. I can sort of control it in a way, compared to the random nature of the violence that I'm afraid I'll experience if I leave.
Marie, your observation of that is one of the ingredients that we try and cultivate in the advocates, in our undergraduate advocates that we train, because that displays being tremendously trauma informed. And that just means we're really sensitive to the ways that trauma appears in individuals' lives. And trusting a survivor, a victim, to make some decisions for themselves, even if with our academic knowledge, we know those decisions might not be in their best interest. And having the patience and the respect to say, yep, you're choosing that predictability, and that's what you need right now. And you get to name what you need right now, because all of the decisions in your life have been made for you. So that's a critical step to enable victims to make their own decisions and build that self-confidence back up again, even if it might put them in a continuing exposure to violence.
I also wanted to mention, especially since, you know, you're working with kids, some research suggests that that young girls who experience child sexual abuse have twice the risk of being in violent relationships with partners as adults. And I say that, so twice the risk, right? I say that to say that many of the moms you might be dealing with also have these trauma abuse histories that are also part of that impact. Right. So the predictable violence might feel much safer than what they had escaped before they even got into that relationship. Right. So just sort of amplifying the point that you are both making.
And on the other hand, the perpetrator has his learned behaviors, because domestic violence is a learned behavior. They want power. They have seen it. It has worked. And it works very well for them because they got what they wanted.
There's some studies that say 80% of children exposed to intimate partner violence go on to be in abusive relationships as adults.
And those are the stats that I think make the work that you're doing so difficult. Because on the one hand, we want to interrupt that cycle, right? And it can often seem like the easiest way to interrupt that cycle is to take the kids out of the household, because taking the kids out of the household might appear to be a way to break that cycle. And sometimes, obviously, it absolutely is. And sometimes it isn't that simple, right? And so I think that's part of the reasons why, you know, talking about and thinking through the impact of intimate partner violence is really, it's critical to what you do. Right.
And I also understand that in terms of you're saying about understanding the history behind where people are coming from and why they're in the situation they're in, just getting the background and knowing that can, you know, get you some more insight into why they're doing things that they're doing or making decisions that they're making.
Yeah. I mean, to Jennifer's point, like, the decision might not look like a good one to any of us in the room, but it might actually be a very thoughtful, smart choice, given what the options are. Right.
Sure. We do have a question in the chat about a lot of this is discussed like adult to adult, but what happens between adult and child too? Is that considered the same?
No.
The same in what sense?
So Robin, that was your question. Do you mind just kind of clarifying what your question is?
So in that wheel, there was all of the different quadrants. And some of them I've seen demonstrated between parent and child.
Mhm.
So is that then also considered domestic violence, or is that something different?
Generally, that falls under the umbrella of family violence. And I bet Tricia too, you could comment on this, not to put you on the spot as well. But you know, that falls under the umbrella of family violence. And of course, in all abusive relationships, we see these power and control wheels for all different sorts of populations. So you see them for teen dating, you see them for immigrant families, you see them for non-documented families. So there's a million different nuanced power and control wheels, because obviously the mechanisms of intimidation and coercion and forced behavior and power over dynamics all remain the same.
Okay, thank you.
We see these in elder care cases, like I mean, this might sound, I don't know, a little bit cliche, but someone mentioned it, you know, it works. I think although the power and control wheel might be modified a little bit for different age groups or different kinds of relationships or different populations, the truth is like 90% of it's the same. And it's because it's a tried and true method, right? It works. And so you know, if it's, I sometimes think, I find people are surprised that wow, this case of abuse looks so much like this one, and it looks so much like this one, because they kind of often do. The patterns are very clear and very strong and very present, even if the particulars are different.
And
So the
they're
good
all-
news, and no, go ahead.
And they're all used to establish power and control. That's what this is all about.
Yep. So the good news is, if there's good news in it, once you learn to see it, you'll be able to see it in multiple different settings because you're used to being able to see it, right? So that's the good news. It's not like you have to learn 25 different versions of it to be able to see it.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Jennifer, do we want to talk any more about the sort of financial stuff and the leaving pieces?
Yeah, I think we need to, because it just really informs everything. So when we think about economic abuse, economic isolation, so let's think about it in a whole bunch of different ways. Let's think about it in terms of economic abuse, but then let's think about it also in terms of the economic consequences of leaving, because today we're talking about why doesn't someone leave. So if our survivor is a woman, and 74% of them in the state of Delaware are, so we can say she pretty safely. Let's think about the wage gap, you know. So we're starting from a problematic financial position already. This person may not have been able to work, permitted to work. If they were, they likely faced consequences at work because of their experience of violence. So their career trajectory was disrupted between 21 and 60. So it's kind of a wide range depending on where you are and what the measure is. Victims of intimate partner violence lose their job for reasons stemming from the abuse. So even if you're not losing your job while you're enduring an abusive relationship, you're certainly not advancing. And this is compounding the fact that white women are only going to make 80% to the dollar, and those numbers tank down to 60 cents to the dollar, and in that 60 to 80 range for women of color, Hispanic women, and other different populations. So we're starting from behind. We haven't had the same path of advancement, and we probably have risked censure, lost the ability for recommendations, and not progressed in our positions because we're already navigating that abuse. So we've got no access to finances. hopefully could rely on the help of family and friends, but you know, it's the most dangerous time to leave. So now you're not only worried about your own safety, your child's safety, but exposing the person who's helping you and their safety. So it's a pretty grim, bleak situation. Now throw in some legal representation to navigate the cross filings, your own filing. Nick Beard is presenting an absolutely critical ingredient of where you're going to go, because there is no affordable housing. There's a tremendous lack of affordable housing in the state of Delaware. That's even escalated in certain counties and certain regions of the state that, you know, have very limited access to emergency shelters and come up with some innovative solutions, but limited solutions, such as renting trailers and hoteling to house people with their children. So now we've got housing in the mix too. It's very costly.
And I'm new to Delaware, as y'all know, but I didn't see any robust public transportation system. So, you know, maybe I missed it, but, you know, to Jennifer's point, like if you're escaping, leaving, you may be leaving a place where you were able to walk to certain stuff. And now you're going to be trying to relocate to a place where now you really need, there's lots of parts of Delaware, it seems like you have to have a car. How are you going to pay for that? Right.
Are there any domestic violence shelters for women and children?
Absolutely, yes. In all of our counties, we have housing.
Okay.
But, you know, they have limited beds.
Mm-hmm.
During COVID, they came up with some innovative solutions, and now some housing is offered in motels and hotels to expand that. But we have shelters in every single county, and Child Inc. and People's Place could connect you with shelter services, as could calling the domestic violence hotline if someone you know is in need of shelter services. But Nick just put in the comment, space cannot keep up with the demand. So we have to be innovative and always help our survivors think of alternative solutions.
I also think, can I jump in here real quickly on this point, that it also presumes that everyone who she's going to interact with in the criminal or civil legal system understands that a shelter is not necessarily an inability to care for your kids or being homeless, right? I mean, you know, if I'm in court in a custody battle and he's got a house and I'm living in a homeless shelter. So whether that's true or not, there's a lot of fear that if I do that, I'll lose my kids, right?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, Angie. Like, as a former DFS worker, you know, this was it's very challenging when, you know, their primary job is to ensure the safety of children. And then you have this poor mother who's a victim and is trying to do the right thing, but then somebody calls a hotline because maybe, you know, their needs might not be totally being met, and you don't want to pile on. And it's kind of like, where's the balance? You know, your job is really to make sure that the kids are safe, but this woman is trying to make good decisions for her child that eventually, you know, everything's going to be okay, hopefully. But it's tough because then a lot of times they end up losing their children as well. And it's like just terrible to watch, you know?
Yep. I appreciate that you shared that story, because I think that's really part of the whole impact of domestic violence or intimate partner violence is very little is clear cut and clean. Like, most of it is very complicated, and it's a jigsaw puzzle so often to try to figure out how to keep everybody safe.
Mm-hmm. Earlier in the discussion, we were talking about how exposure to violence as a child leads to the experience of violence as an adult in your relationships. And now we're talking about economic issues, exposure to poverty significantly increases the likelihood of domestic violence in a home. So it's even at the root cause, even though we've been talking about all of these detrimental financial outcomes at the tail end after you've experienced the violence, but it's also the cause of the violence as well.
Yeah, so true. Oh man, thank you, ladies. So we just have a couple minutes left. So do you want to just kind of provide maybe some final thoughts, or I don't know, whatever you think we should know as kind of a takeaway?
What can we do to help prevent? That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think as my experience with working with DV victims is to learn how the parents grew up, how they were raised by their parents. You learn a whole lot of about them, and which might explain the situation they are in. How did their parents treat them? How did their parents treat each other?
I mean, I think, you know, the prevention is in the title of our center. We think it's critical. And I think, you know, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the prevention needs to start immediately and early and often. And that's where the greatest possibility of interrupting the cycle happens. And you know, I would encourage all of you to think about, you know, what are policies that you could advocate for that would keep children safe and interrupt the violence, but not necessarily penalize a victim of intimate partner violence for being a victim of intimate partner violence.
That's my favorite question, because that's why we all can keep doing this work, because at the end of the day, we believe that this is a preventable problem. But like Angie was saying, those policies, they're not necessarily those related to violence explicitly. Wage equality prevents gender-based violence.
Yeah.
Teaching healthy relationships for our children prevents gender-based violence. The availability of safe and affordable housing prevents gender-based violence. So we can all work really hard for economic justice and to confront damaging gender norms and to teach early all of these signs of unhealthy relationships, so our children learn to be better partners and better friends and better family members. But it is definitely preventable.
Wonderful. So I will stop us there. Thank you, ladies, so much. This was incredibly helpful and shows us just how big and deep this problem is, but you're absolutely right. It is preventable. So hopefully this training was helpful in understanding kind of where domestic violence, how it happens, and you know, how we can prevent it, and why, you know, why victims stay and what that looks like. So Jen and Angie, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Love being here. Thanks for sharing all your stories.
Thanks for all the work you do.